Hey guys, Kiz here. I play Unholy DK for the guild Flopov on Alliance side Aragol. I'm mainly making this guide for a lot of raiders that are recently swapping to or will be swapping to Unholy for ICC prog, or just playing it in TOGC because it is a strong ult to have currently. And yeah, I'm just in this guide I'm going to go over why you should play Unholy in TOGC and ICC. I'm going to go over the talents and glyphs that you should be using, the stat weights and gearing kind of philosophy that I have, alongside using the simulator. Then we can go over some rotational specifics like openers and general rotations just on longer boss fights, and then just to wind it all up, some class specific tips and macros and weak auras and things like that that have helped me in the past. So we'll just jump straight into it. Unholy is currently the highest single target DPS spec in the game, probably outside of an AF that has focus magic and PI and all those things. Unholy doesn't really require any assistance from the raid, which is what makes them super strong to stack. Obviously last timings are quite important for Unholies, but luckily for us, almost always you're going to be using last on pull, or if you're not lasting on pull, it's going to be pretty obvious when you'll be lasting, so you can always prepare for that. Unholies going forward into ICC are also going to have the probably equal strongest AoE, which is pretty crazy when you think about it, because they also have the strongest single target. The 4 set, this is my old DK, my other one's logged out with the Midsummer buffs currently, but when you get your 4 set that has your Blood Plague, gives your Blood Plague the ability to crit, your AoE just fucking takes off. It's crazy. You can just, on that Gigapool and Vezak's room, you're doing 50k pretty comfortably, which is pretty much on par with all the other blaster AoE classes like Aflock and Combat Rogue and Feral Druid with Berserk. So all of a sudden you become an AoE god alongside a single target god. Unholies also have passive AoE, which is very, very desirable in raids. It always has been, it always will be. D&D is in our single target rotation, and then also it's a single target DPS gain to use Pestilence on a fight where there's ads, even if those ads don't count for your pass, or you don't want to kill them, like on Ignis. If you Pestilence the ads on Ignis, they're proccing Wandering Plague, which does more damage per blood rune than a Blood Boil or Blood Strike will. So spreading your diseases is also a DPS gain, even on single target. So the talents that you should be using as Unholy in trial, and that you should be using when ICC comes out, is right here. I'll link these in the description, but this is the spec that you take when you acquire the Sigil of Virulence, which is 25 badges from the badge vendor outside TOGC. Very strong relic. You should be getting this ASAP. Personally, I waited till I got my 4 set on my main, and then I got this just because I was reluctant to change playstyle. But it is the single biggest DPS increase item to get off the bat, and I do recommend you get it early and get used to using it, because it will be used in ICC for quite a while, and obviously on prog you want to be very comfortable with this new rotation, so get this ASAP. The glyphs that you use with this are Glyph of Death and Decay, Glyph of Icy Touch, and Glyph of the Ghoul. Glyph of the Ghoul and Glyph of Death and Decay have been staples for the whole expansion, but Icy Touch recently has overtaken Dark Death on single target and AoE situations, because we dropped the Sigil from XT, Sigil of the Vengeful Heart. So they're no longer stacking with the Death Coil Sigil, so you just run the Icy Touch Sigil now. Not to mention you get a bit more value per disease with running 1 point in Epidemic, so just does a little bit more damage, and Icy Touch is just going to edge it out on both situations. Just go ahead and chuck these in, set and forget, and that's it. The best minors that you should be using are Pestilence. You need to have Minor Glyph of Pestilence, and you also basically mandatory to have Glyph of Raised Dead. I would recommend your third Minor Glyph to be Glyph of Blood Tap. I like to play around with Corpse Explosion, that's why I currently have this, but Blood Tap removes the health cost of Blood Tap, and that is quite handy. I would use that because sometimes you're low and you want a Blood Tap and it's dumb to do so, so that's about it. You don't want a Glyph of the Horn of Winter because you have an Enhanced Shaman anyway, probably. So, yep. So in terms of stat weights and gearing, generally the main thing, stats that you want to go for is you want to have 8% sheet hit. That is 8% before Nerves of Cold Steel, which is your Talents and Frost, and before the Shadow Priest and Drain Eye buffs. So that means you want 8% hit rating purely coming from your gear. What this does is makes it so your ghoul is expertise capped on boss targets. It's very important because your ghoul absolutely blasts. So you want 8% sheet hit. Now, it is worth gemming strength hit up to 8% in yellow sockets where you get strength bonuses. For instance, this strength bonus, it is a yellow socket, so I've put an orange strength haste gem in there. If you are under 8% hit, it would be worth to put 10 strength, 10 hit rating in this socket. And any other socket that is going to be using yellow sockets for a strength bonus. So there's a couple, there's also, I think there's another one somewhere. I'm not on my main, so I couldn't tell you off the top of my head, but it is worth gemming yellows for strength bonuses, even if it's just 4. It used to not be the case, but it is now. So yeah, go ahead and do that up to 8% sheet. Secondly, strength. You just basically want to stack strength. It's pretty obvious. You just absolutely blast the fuck out of strength on all of your gear as much as you can. Just stack that strength. Don't worry about too much else and you're pretty set. Third, obviously expertise is quite important as a stat. DKs don't suffer as much as other classes from not having expertise cap, purely because we get our runes refunded when we, get our shit dodged and parried. So you just press it again, it's okay. It is still quite annoying though, because oftentimes, you want to spend your runes as fast as possible, and if you get double dodge on your Plague Strike and your opener, it's just quite frustrating. Not to mention, when we get into it a bit more, getting your Blood Strikes and Scourge Strikes dodged is going to be quite frustrating when you're trying to fish for the new procs in your opener, because oftentimes you are on a time limit, trying to get all of those procs before your Death's Verdict or Greatness runs out of time. So unfortunately, well, not unfortunately, but generally the way it works is our gear is going to get us pretty close to expertise cap. I'll go ahead and open up the simulator. So here's the DK simulator just with P3 BIS enabled. So I'll go ahead and put the link to this in the description as well. You definitely, if you're looking to play Unholy, should get very familiar with this. It's a super simple tool to use and it will really improve your DPS. Like, it's very simple, and it also just means you don't have to ask everyone else what you think about gearing. You can just go ahead and do it yourself. There's these presets set in here. I can also give you my presets. I've got my DK here, my DK1, I got my DK2, I've even got the ICC set ready. Just, it's great to have this sim. So this is my second DK. I actually haven't updated this one. So this is my DK1 currently. So I am currently pretty low on expertise. So in this situation, it would be worth me to put on an expertise piece. I think in BIS, the belt has expertise on it. So there's this Bloodbath girdle that 68 expertise, and you'll see, so expertise cap is 6.5%. So this set has 5.95 expertise. If, for instance, you couldn't get armbands of Bedlam, which is going to be pretty common because I imagine anybody who's currently rolling Unholy is not going to be going into Ulduar and doing Mimron. Nobody wants to fucking do that, right? So more than likely, you're going to find yourself in a situation where you'll be using Bone Shatter arm plates, which have expertise on them. But if you use these and the Bloodbath Girdle, you're going to put yourself quite a bit over expertise cap, and it's going to be pretty detrimental. So it would be a lot better to be using Belt of Colossal Rage, but that is also through Mind Council, so if you can't get your hands on that, look, I haven't done too much, looking too much into it, but I mean, it probably would be your best bet to just keep using this and go over expertise cap. Unfortunately, it looks like there is no other options to drop it. So if you can't get either of those, the belt from Ulduar or the braces, you're likely just going to have to sit over cap. But generally, the point I was trying to make is you don't worry about expertise, you don't gem expertise, you just use the gear you can that has the most strength. If you're unsure of how this gear is performing, you just open up the simulator, put all your stuff in, and sim it, and that's it. Oftentimes, expertise isn't simming as good as you'd think. It's not like playing a warrior or a ret, or look, I don't know, I'm sure Ferals scale quite well with expertise as well. But yeah, you just make sure you've got the Unholy Dual Wield Scourge Strike build on, not the Unholy Dual Wield regular one, and you want to go into your settings. You know, 3-minute fight's pretty good to sim it on. Obviously not in front of target, shit like that. If you have any questions about the sim, just let me know, because it is very, very, very useful to do, and you will want to be simming your sets to make sure you've got the optimal set going into ICC prog, and also just week to week if you want to pass or if you want to blast, just make sure you've got the best set on that you can. So that's basically everything to do with stats and gearing. I didn't think I missed anything. You just really want to sim yourself. Oh, one other thing it's pretty important to mention, the Stormplate Cleaver and Remorseless are basically the same item. So you're just changing, swapping crit for hit. So, for instance, if you had to run, I mean, in most situations they're going to sim within 5 DPS of each other. So the point is, don't be greedy. Just take what you can get your hands on. I think Combat Rogues really want these, and Frost DKs really want these, so they're pretty contested items, but don't sit there all phase trying to wait for Remorseless because Abyssless says they're better. They're both very, very good, and they're both the weapons you want to have. That's it. Okay, so basically, I'm just going to go over the Sigil of Virulence rotation. The opener used to be a little bit different before this new Scourge Strike build came into effect in TAGC, but essentially our opener now consists of fishing for a proc that comes from our 2 set, tier 9, which has a chance to grant us 180 strength. Has a chance to grant us 180 strength for 15 seconds. I have found this personally to be quite a difficult buff to obtain. It's griefing me quite a bit, whereas this Scourge Strike Sigil of Virulence has a chance to give us 200 strength for 20 seconds. This seems to be proccing quite often. So this 2-piece tier 10, tier 9 has a 45-second ICD, whereas the Sigil of Virulence has a 20-second uptime and a 10-second CD. So if you play well, you can have Sigil of Virulence buff up for the whole of the boss fight. So your opener, very important as Unholy. It also is generally important on any fight where there's a DPS check, because you really want to be getting the best Garg you can. A lot of the time throughout Wrath's lifetime, it's been on Unholy's job to burn down priority targets, such as Yogg Brain, even, you know, other things. They've been just really good at just burning targets, so you really want to be able to fish for the best Garg possible, and that requires you obviously starting in Unholy Presence. Unholy Presence increases the attack speed of your ghoul and your gargoyle by 15%. So when you are, primarily when your goal is to burn a target down, Unholy Presence is the presence to be in when you're using your cooldowns. It also snapshots the attack speed onto your army. So Garg snapshots everything that is attack power related. So as I just mentioned, there's a 180 strength buff from your 2 set, there's a 200 strength buff from your Scourge Strike, there's a Unholy Strength from your Fallen Crusader weapons, and there's your Darkmoon card Greatness, and your Death's Choice. If you don't have Comet, you might be running Death's Choice and Darkmoon card Greatness. That is also fine. You would be looking for both of those strength procs if those were what you were running. Your army snapshots all of your haste buffs as well as your strength buffs, but the strength and AP buffs don't scale quite as well with your army. You do primarily want to focus on just snapshotting that with your haste buffs. I will say though, it is getting to the point in the game where army is starting to not be as worth to snapshot as it once was. In Nax, for instance, a fully snapshotted army was doing 80 to 90k. In Ulduar, it was doing about 110k. And I imagine in ICC and TOGC, you know, it'll be about 120k. And Army of the Dead is, I think, a 4-second channel. Yeah, 4-second channel. So if you do the math on it, essentially, you know, you need to be doing 25k-ish single target DPS to match how much DPS you're losing by sitting there channeling it, because you are channeling it with all of your cooldowns and lust up. So the army needs to be more worth for you to sit there and cast it over you just hitting the boss. So in some instances, it is the case that it's better to hit the boss than army. But for now, you do want to be snapshotting army with all of your haste buffs, including Unholy Presence, Lust, Speed Pot, Gloves. So as I just mentioned, your Garg snapshots all of your AP buffs, but it dynamically updates with haste buffs. What that means is, if I use gloves for 12, which lasts 12 seconds during my 30-second Garg, it's only going to get the benefit of the gloves for those 12 seconds that the gloves are up. When Garg is initially cast, it takes about 2 to 3 seconds to fly down. As you'll see now, I'll press it right now. 1, 2, 3, and now it just starts casting. So what that means is when you cast your gargoyle, for it to get the best uptime from your haste buffs possible, you want to be using your gloves and your haste pot, and preferably your comet while your Garg is already casting. So if you just summon your Garg and press all your haste buffs, your Garg's going to miss about 2 seconds of those buffs just because it's flying down, potentially meleeing the boss once or twice. Unfortunately, that happens every now and then. So it is best to summon your Garg, to use your haste buffs a little bit after. So the general rotation with the Sigil of Virulence relic is, I don't like to precast Ghoul Frenzy. These are generally pass openers, and while it is probably the best way to do it, you also need to take into account that, oh shit, I gotta change screen, that we will most likely be running straight into bosses in ICC. We were running straight into bosses in Ulduar and Nax. So if you get too into this mindset of preparing perfectly before every boss like you can in Trial, you're going to get really taken by surprise when we're in ICC, and all of a sudden your shit's on cooldown, your brain's fucking frazzled because you've never been in this situation before, and you just, it's best to just probably learn on the fly, do some Ulduar 10s, maybe even in the 25s, just try to get used to running into bosses with your stuff on cooldown and just trying to get the hang of how to make the most out of your gargoyle and your cooldowns when they're not perfectly lined up like they are currently in every trial boss, because it's just basically a pass zone. So your opener will be Icy Touch, Plague Strike. Get your diseases up first and foremost. The most important thing that you'll do on every single target, even on trash, a shitty little target, you're probably going to put your diseases on to spread it. So you put your diseases up, Blood Strike, and you're using the Blood Strike to proc your 2-piece tier 9, and then you're going to Scourge Strike to try to proc the Sigil of Virulence. And then you're going to Blood Strike or Blood Boil, depending on if your Blood Rune, if your 2-piece tier 9 procced or not. So if it did proc, you're going to Blood Boil. If it didn't, you're going to use Blood Strike again. And then you're going to Blood Tap, Unholy Frenzy, and Power Rune Weapon. So there's obviously two situations here now. Quite often I've found, I've only done a couple raids with the new sigils and tier 9s, but quite often something does go wrong. You don't get your blood, your 2-piece tier 9 buff, or you don't get your sigil buff. So if you do get both buffs, you just cast your Garg, easy. And then D&D, dump RP. Like I said before, you want to wait for your Garg to be casting. So in that time, you're dumping RP, and then you're going to pop all your haste buffs once your Garg has started casting, and cast Army. From that point, your opener's over, and it's pretty obvious what to do from that point on, because your runes start coming up in order, and you always want to be spending your runes in sets of 3. So, you know, Frost, Unholy, Blood. Frost, Unholy, Blood. Blood, tap, Unholy, and then here, Frost, Unholy, Blood, Frost, Unholy, Blood, Frost, Unholy, Blood. It's just always using them in sets of 3. Just hammer that into your brain. Frost, Unholy, Blood. Just keep going in sets of 3. Once you find yourself in a situation where you're just randomly pressing them as soon as they come up, you're going to start fucking your rotation up really bad. And it also is very important to have them up coming at similar times, just because you are using Scourge Strike now. So if your sigil didn't proc, or your 2-piece tier 9 didn't proc, instead of Garging here, you're going to use Scourge Strike again to try to fish for it, and then Blood Strike again to fish for it. Obviously, if you already got it, it's a 45-second ICD, you're going to Blood Boil. So we'll just go over that here once with the opener, just so you can get an idea of, you know, what it looks like when the buffs proc or they don't proc. So I'll be running into the boss. I got my Unholy Might, got my Unholy Force. It's basically just free from this point. I got a really good Garg, I'd wait for it to cast, use my haste CDs now when it starts casting, Empowering Weapon, and Army. So I basically just got super fucking lucky. That doesn't really happen, but you kind of get the gist. If you just go to just tele to the DK area, or just come to these training dummies, and you just sit there and just practice your opener every 3 minutes when your Guard comes up, you'll get so much better in an hour rather than just running into a raid and trying to do it on the fly. I really recommend people just running in and just practicing their Garg openers on dummies, because it really, really, really helps. I sat there doing it for fucking hours on end in Nax, and it was very beneficial. So definitely recommend doing that. So, other than that, just after your openers finished, your main priorities do stay the same. It's just keeping your diseases up, keeping your Scourge Strike, Sigil, or Virulence buff up, and keeping D&D up. You also need to be keeping up your Desolation buff, which comes from your Blood Strike. And you'll mostly be using Ghoul Frenzy with Blood Tap. So if you just sit on the boss, just practice your rotation. Just sit there, wait for your runes to come up. So in this case, I would be using D&D because it's coming up and I haven't got it on CD. Refreshing my diseases before they end. Putting up Desolation because I had 6 seconds left on it. Unholy Force is about to come up, so I'd Scourge Strike. I didn't get it, Scourge Strike again. Diseases are running out. D&D's coming up. It's just sit there and hit it and just practice your rotation. If you have any rotational questions, hit me up. It is pretty tricky when things start going on, and I mean, if you try to do Mimir on hard mode and you're not familiar with your rotation, you're going to get fucked trying to dodge things and all that. It's like any class, you know, it's just, I feel like Unholy more than others. It really does just become imprinted on your brain at some point, so go and practice your rotations. It's very important. Alright, now moving on to some generals class-specific tips. Some things that are really going to help you in raids is knowing about leeway. The leeway mechanic can be utilized by pretty much every melee class. I can think of currently, maybe not enhanced shamans, but anyway, leeway is very important to use on an unholy because pestilence is cast from where your character is, not where the target is. So, for instance, I'm in range to pestilence, which is a 15-yard ability. Here, it's going to come off this target from where I am, not from where this target is. So it might not hit this dummy, I mean it probably still will, but there's a lot of instances where a tank is dragging a mob into a pack, for instance back here, and you want to be in front of that mob as close to the pack as possible so you can pestilence early, get your rune on CD, and just keep blasting. If you were behind the mob here, and he's dragging it back, and you want a pestilence, it's not going to hit those mobs. You need to be ahead or in position to pestilence. For instance, on a noob, you're hitting a noob, the tanks are dragging in mobs from behind here. If you're sitting in the middle of a noob or even behind it and you pesty, it's not going to hit those ads. But if you jump backwards and pesty, it'll hit those ads 5 to 6 yards further than if you just stood still. So jumping and using pestilence is very, very important to get used to. And secondly, jumping and using D&D is also very important to get used to. So if I D&D here, right on this part, I mean, it is hitting this. Oh no, it's not hitting it from there. But, for instance, if I jumped, I guarantee that the D&D will hit that target. So there is specific situations in Ulduar where, see, it hits it, exact same spot I cast it. On Freya in Ulduar, jumping in D&D was very important. You could hit all of the flower mobs when they came up. And just generally on trash, you know, things are spread out, like on the Gigapool in Vezax, if there's a caster out there and you D&D and you jump, you might hit it, whereas otherwise you might not. So jumping when you D&D every time, very important. Jumping when you pestilence every time, very important. Things like that. Secondly, you probably have seen my UI, you know, there are definite improvements to this UI. It is what I got used to and what I love using. But there are some things that I do think are mandatory that you need to have and everybody needs to have, and that is obviously ICD trackers for everything. So we just got 2 new ICDs that we need to track. Technically, you probably don't have to track your Sigil of Virulence ICD because it has a 20-second uptime with a 10-second ICD, but you do want to track that it's up. So you don't have to track its ICD, but you do have to track it being up. Sorry, I just have this really dumb thing here that I want to get rid of. I'll do it some other time. I just have a weak or accidentally overlapping this. So you want to track your Heart Strike Unholy Might. See, it's just accidentally going over my Boneshield, which is dumb. You want to track your Unholy Might because that is a 45-second ICD. It lasts for 15 seconds. You want to be using Blood Strike when the buff is available. So you need to track your Unholy Might cooldown. So now 30-second cooldown on my Unholy Might. I'll know that I need to be blood striking when that 30 seconds ends. Secondly, I've got my Sigil, Unholy Force that comes up here. You know, 20-second uptime. When that's about to run out, I know I need to be Scourge striking pretty soon. Scourge striking obviously when your diseases are already up and you know that if you Scourge strike your diseases won't fall. It's okay for your diseases to fall for just a little bit. Thirdly, you want to be tracking your Boneshield. I like to track Boneshield, not everyone has to track Boneshield, but Boneshield saves your life in a lot of situations. It reduces the damage taken by 20%. So bosses have turned to me and hit me when I'm a bit of a monkey and I go too early. Big trash has hit me. I mean, multiple trash has hit me that would have killed warriors, but I survived because of Boneshield. So it is pretty important to keep Boneshield up for survival. It also is a 2% damage increase, so it is desirable to have up as well. Thirdly, you want to track your Desolation. This is from Bloodstrike. It's kind of become a little bit more of a passive thing just because Bloodstrike also procs your tier 10, so Desolation, have that tracked. Thirdly, you want to obviously track your Ghoul Frenzy. Ghoul Frenzy is a great thing to track. You will mostly be using it with Blood Tap now, but you do want to know when you need to refresh it, so go ahead and track that as well. Lastly, obviously your Trinket ICD is very, very important to track. It is best to have your trinkets offset before a boss, but like I said earlier, I wouldn't bother unless you're trying to pass an ICC, which is totally fair enough. Just don't get too used to it. But you need to be tracking if they all can be in one place, that is probably the best way to do it. This is my clone DK, and some things are a bit scuffed on it, just because I imported it straight from my main. But yeah, track, look, all my trinkets lined up. I'd pop my gloves, pop my haze pot, army, garg, all that shit. It's just very important to have all of this in a nice little spot. You're not looking all over your screen, you're not looking up for your buff bar to try find your buffs, like which ones you still need. Just have them all in one spot and just, just blast. Alright, so you definitely want all of those tracking weak auras, rotational weak auras that show your runes that are available, things like that. Don't use the regular UI, you're just fucking yourself doing that. If you would like to take some of these weak auras, you can DM me and I'll send you individual ones. This is a whole pack that I've created for myself. The one on my main is better. Just everything's better lined up, and that random thing doesn't pop up here. And because I only just got the 2-piece tier 9 on this account and the sigil too, so another thing is your pet macros. Some very, very important things to do is put pet claw into some of your abilities. What happens when you have pet claw into your abilities? So ideally, as a DK, you want to have leap off, you want to have gnaw off, and you want to have claw on autocast, obviously. But what happens when things are on autocast, it's the same for warlock pets, it doesn't claw at a very fast rate. Look, it should be using it now, it's got enough energy, but it just is slow. It's not spamming it. Look at how much energy it's being, it's just not using it fast enough. Look, it might even cap out on energy before using a claw. It's terribly designed, so you want to put claw into your macros. Watch how much faster it starts clawing. So it'll just basically claw as soon as it has enough energy to do it if it's macroed into your abilities. I personally have claw macroed into my Plague Strike, my Heart Strike, and my Death Coil, because it's just the highest DPS to have it into your abilities. Now, there is a caveat to this. When you have Pet Claw macroed into your abilities, your pet will start attacking the target. So if you're just sitting there and you press Heart Strike, Death Coil, or Claw, your pet will run in and hit the boss if you're not familiar with your macros. I do not recommend, if you're new to Unholy, to have these macros, because nobody wants to be that guy who sends a pet in and wipes a raid on a noob 50 attempt because you forgot the claw was in your Plague Strike and Heart Strike and all that. I personally have never done that because I'm very aware of what my macros are. There are macros that you can use that only cast claw when your pet is already attacking a target. It's something like at target exists, pet already attacking. I don't fucking know the specific one, but I know warlocks use them. The problem I have with that macro specifically is on trash, it is a very big DPS increase when, say I want to swap to this target, instead of having to press pet attack on every single new target I go to, it's just like manually doing it, which is a little bit annoying. And it's definitely going to be a DPS decrease over me just, pressing Heart Strike on this and then my pet attacks it, Heart Strike on this, now my pet attacks it, Plague Strike on this, my pet attacks it. It's just being able to do that is very important on trash. So maybe in TOGC, don't macro those in. Maybe just have Pet Claw on a separate macro and spam that macro, just as long as you're not just leaving your pet to auto cast Claw. Just make sure you've got it in some kind of bind. Now, the biggest caveat to this, like I said, is imagine there's a Crusher Tentacle and I want to Death Coil it. I send it, my pet goes in. Death Coil, my pet goes in. See, I know about my macros, so whenever I'm Death Coiling targets I don't want my pet to go into, like on KT and Nax, on the phase 1, shit like that, I just always send my pet back. It's fine, it's easy for me. But just be aware of your macros, be aware of what could potentially happen. Don't fuck up and send your pet in. Also, very important not to have leap autocast, because if Claw's in your shit and you have leap on autocast, your pet's gonna leap on the boss, and it's just, you'll get memed forever, and that sucks. Leap, obviously, you should have it on another macro. It is quite handy, especially just, you want your pet to have good uptime, so you just have leap on a macro and have gnaw on a macro as well. So I like to, I've got both separately bound. It is also very important to have a pet leap to player macro. I know I've got it somewhere here. Pet leap. slash cast at player leap, because pets quite often, I mean, on beasts for instance, your pet just stands in the poison and dies. On Obsidian Sanctum, your pet would stand in there and die. Luckily on Saffron, your pets were fine, they never really died, but there is some AoE stuff in ICC, and having pet being able to leap to you is very important if you want to run out and your pet to stay on a target and jump back to you for an DPS increase. So do have pet leap also bound to you. It is quite handy to have. Other than that, I like to have my haste pots macro together. So my haste CDs. So that's not the one. So I like to have basically, you wouldn't have Summon Gargoyle, this is my alt account, in there. I mean, it doesn't matter, Summon Gargoyle can be in there because you're going to be manually using Gargoyle first when you get all your AP buffs, and then you want to have another macro that's going to pop your gloves and your haste pot, and if you've got Mark of Norgan on, you want to be using that. Just something, I mean, you can manually cast haste, gloves and haste pot if you want, that's totally fine. I would recommend having haste pot on another separate cooldown, bind, just because sometimes there is cases where you want to pre-pop, but just have your CDs in a bind, your haste CDs, so that you can press that bind and army straight away. It's pretty handy. Some other just general things that people have asked me about DKs, some things I get is people ask me, do I always sit in Unholy Presence when you're Garging? It is a very, very big DPS increase to be in Unholy Presence when you're Garging. A 15% attack speed on your Garg is the biggest increase to your Garg outside of Lust. Bigger than all the other things like Comet and all that. But it depends what your goal is. So if your goal is to burn down a target, for instance on a noob, it might be better DPS to be Blood Presence and Garg because you're doing so much more damage to the ads with the 15% damage buff from Blood Presence on your diseases and D&D, but your aim is to kill the noob, right? It's not to kill the ads. So unless you're just doing some parse shit, you do want to be on Unholy Presence if your goal is to burn the target with Garg. So I would recommend always being in Unholy Presence when you're Garging, except for the one fight on Champions, because Faction Champs is just, I mean, the damage you do in Blood Presence is just so much higher than in Unholy on that fight, not to mention your healing from the healed by 4% of the non-periodic damage dealt, so that is also handy. But just sitting on Unholy Presence on every fight when you're Garging. As soon as your Garg expires, you swap back to Blood Presence. But one of the things that people kind of get confused about when they first start playing Unholy is you actually do the same DPS while Bloodlusted in Unholy Presence and Blood Presence to a single target. So people are always freaking out, you know, trying to get back into Blood Presence once their Garg finishes, and they're like, Desolation's gonna fall off and all this stuff, and they're like, no, but I gotta get back to Blood Presence. It's not worth it. Just stay in Unholy Presence until there's a good time to swap back. Don't fuck your rotation to get back into Blood Presence. You know, don't use that Blood rune when you need it to D&D. Just sit in Unholy Presence till there's a good time to swap back to Blood and go back to Blood. Even if it's 10 seconds after your Garg's faded, that's okay. Just make sure you start the fight in Unholy if you're Garging on pull, and go back to Blood when you can. Other than that, just small things that you want to be doing as an Unholy DK is definitely using your defensives to your advantage. I'll just go over a couple off the top of my head. I can make another video on this in the future, maybe after we've done some ICC on the PTR, talk about some defensives and potential uses for it in that. But the big one on beasts, you want to be AM anti-magic shelling the fire debuff from the snake. So do not anti-magic shell the poison ever, because the snake is always going to fire debuff at some point, and you can completely immune it as a DK. Everyone else around you will get fucked and hit, but you'll be fine. So don't be a griefer and run into melee with others, because you don't want to spread it either, but just AMS it. Don't let that debuff go onto you, because it's just huge to immune. You really want to immune it. Secondly, The AMS is backup on Icehowl. Usually you can AMS the freeze, so just AMS 1 second before the freeze is going to go out, because it has come out 0.5 seconds before a couple times. You AMS the first one, and you Icebound Fortitude the second one, which is a stun, makes you stun immune. So whatever reason, Blizzard thought it was a great idea to give DKs a wall and a stun immune, so that's great. You stun immune one of the freezes, you AMS the other one. On Jiraxxus, you want to AMS the Infernal Aura, because it does quite a lot of magic damage and you're just getting free RP from your AMS. Very good. On Faction Champs, you want to AMS as you run in, because you're obviously going to be getting hit by quite a lot of magic damage. Oftentimes you can get feared very early. If you get Warrior feared and you're not in the Enhanced Shaman group, it's just super fucking grief. You just have to sit the whole thing. So would recommend AMSing. Actually, I don't know. AMS probably doesn't prevent Warrior Fear, I think it's physical. But it'll still prevent you getting, hit by any other magic CC. So AMS on pool, probably on champs, and then when that runs out, Icebound Fortitude, just use all the defensives you can, because there's no downside to it, and you'll be stun immune, and you help the healers out, and just use it there. On Twin Valks, depending what strat you do, for us we're swapping, I think most guilds are just being safe and swapping to light on the Dark Vortex, but you can AMS even the other Vortex, because it does do some raid damage to you, so you're just getting free RP by AMSing it. Or if you get a orb debuff, we get hit by one of the opposing orbs, it can be quite a lot of damage coming in, so I would, if you're doing the safe strat and you're not going to need the AMS to save your life, use it for a damage increase by AMSing either the Vortex or one of the orb debuffs if one creeps in and hits you from the wrong color. If you guys are doing the risky strat, you definitely want to AMS and wall IBF the Dark Vortex so you don't die. So very, very durable. On a noob in phase 1, you want to be AMSing Penetrating Cold. If you get it early, you just get a bunch of free RP. Your AMS will be back up in the last phase, but you want to have your AMS and IBF for Penetrating Colds in phase 3. Very important. You can basically just keep yourself up. It's an incredible tool to have, help out healers, give yourself some free RP in the process, and blast. Yeah, that's basically it for this Unholy guide. I hope I could help you guys out. I think I covered everything I wanted to cover. Unholy is going to be a really, really good spec in ICC prog. I think it is going to be, most things are pointing towards it going to be a stacked class, and I know that's why a lot of people are rolling it just now. It's also a lot of fun to play, so get out there and practice and sit on the dummy, get your openers going. Yeah, and just get used to playing it. You just don't want to be thinking too much when you're playing. You want to be able to think about boss mechanics and other things that are happening. So yeah, thanks for watching. Hit me a DM on Discord if you know me. If not, leave a comment. I can try to, fill in some more blanks for people if they need some more help. But yep, thank you. Bye.